got a good foundation here, and I'm gonna give you the option. If you, and I think we would be fine to do this kind of on our own. We don't necessarily have to do it here, but I'm going to give you the resource so that you have it at your fingertips, because there are plenty of people that say, yes, I'm doing project-based learning. Lots of project-based learning, but really, in the end, it's just projects, right? Tell me more about this styrofoam planets your students are making. It's the age-old science fair project, right, where mom and dad cry more than the kids do because mom and dad end up having to do it. And then I like to call them the garbage projects, because then at the end we just throw them in the garbage because there's no meaning. But your kids that are going out and they're actually buying rabbits and goats and sheep, that's something tangible that they're going to remember forever, and it's not just something that they threw away, right? So you've had so many great questions that I think what we'll do is, instead of necessarily having you go through some of these examples, I'll let you do it on your own time. But basically what I wanted to do was just remember left-hand column versus right-hand column. We want to be more into this right-hand column piece here as much as possible in terms of challenging our students. So instead of having our students replicate everything, right? If you end up with 28 of the exact same thing, like the exact same thing, that's really a recipe for learning, right? There's no innovation. Now, we're going to see an example in a little bit where you'll see similar products, but how the students get there and what the actual design in the end is going to look a little bit differently. So you can say the requirement is that you create a this, but they should all look different in terms of the creation, right? Trying to get as much expert involvement as you can, not just having them worry about the grades, because if your students are really involved in this process, they're not going to care so much about what the grade is because they're engaged with the process. That teacher assessment versus the audience assessment, we the teachers certainly have to do the assessing because that's what's going to go in the grade book. I'm never going to have some sort of outside expert assess my students to put that grade in the grade book, because they don't know the IEPs, they don't know the 504 plans, they don't know any of those components. But rather than just focusing on that end grade, what is the feedback from the audience? And the kids should be really concerned about what that feedback is from the audience. And when I say audience, please do not think that I'm saying that you're required to bring people in for everything that you do and that becomes your audience. I mean, the Heifer organization, that becomes your audience. You didn't have to bring those people in. So there are plenty of ways that you can have an audience without physically bringing in an audience. So it doesn't always have to be a presentation. Moving away from just doing it in the classroom to that community global piece. And we want to make sure, because the last time we looked at Bloom's, we're promoting that mastery of knowledge. We're moving up the level of Bloom's. We're not just staying in that limited content application piece. So rather than have you do this activity for the next 25 or 30 minutes, because I think you're probably a little bit more interested in hashing out some of these pieces since this is my last official time that's here, what you can do on your own, if you were so inclined, is this. So if you go to my professional wiki space here, and this is also linked in the CoLab website that's been created, and if you go to support materials, it gives you a whole, I think I have a list of 8 different particular projects in which you will see the project overview, and you will also see the student work. And the student work piece is what I think is the most important, because at the end of the day, when I look at that student work, can I say that there truly was a deep understanding of the content? Was there inquiry in this process, or is it just a research paper in disguise? So some of the projects that I put up there, I like better than others. I think all of them have room for improvement. And how to increase the project elements, specifically with the inquiry piece and maybe some of the critique and feedback. But it will give you multiple perspectives from here's that end student work piece. And one of the biggest things that I found in the classroom to see if my project-based learning experience was actually meeting the goals of what I was intending it to meet was to have that student work reviewed by my colleagues from different content areas. And we had certain meeting times that we had to have, and so I was in charge of those meeting times, and so we would set that up. And we would just do student review of work, and I would come and say, okay, here was the project, here's what I wanted to get out of it, take a look at the student work. Did I achieve my goals? And if you don't think that I did, if I fell short, how would you suggest that I improve that? So you can learn a lot from the student work. So if you go to the support materials, that's the key piece there, is the student work is there for you to take a look at. So there are different grade levels. It goes from first grade up to 12th grade. It has all different content areas. A lot of them are interdisciplinary. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to do an interdisciplinary project by any means. But most of them are interdisciplinary to kind of give you that idea. So you can, on your free time, you can peruse those and take a look at them and do some of the critiques. And again, just kind of going with that assigned challenge versus the authentic challenge. And if you want to take a picture of that, you're more than welcome to.
That didn't work last time.
Or it'll be on video.
Yeah, but
You have it on
this
video.
on your site somewhere, or is that copyright or something?
It's technically it's copywritten out of my book, so I don't have it.
Yeah, authentic learning experience.
Yeah. Where's Sheila been? Where's Sheila been for the last 4 sessions, right?
Well, you haven't been selling it.
Mayerson should be giving it to
I mean, come on.
They should.
You should ask Mayerson for it, right?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
There we go.
Just look up read that picture.
Okay.
Or white winter
That's
class.
right here.
I can send it to
Fresh school.
There we go. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that's what you do sometimes. I'll find it at her blog.
Yeah, it's on my website too.
So I can
It's on
get
there,
everything
or my danalauer.com.
Have we done so what and
Yeah. So we did the what.
we did the what?
We did the what. So we're going to get into the so what. So I'm going to give you a couple more strategies. Did you try any of the strategies from last time? Some of the critical thinking ones?
I don't
Anybody?
remember. I probably did.
Yeah, that was last year. I know. It's been so long since I was here. We had them like quickly, successfully, or successively, and now it's been a
That's
couple
something
months.
I would suggest to them if we do a final evaluation, is to just help us tie it together. I mean, meaning, some kind of little binder or folder or something to help us when we come to the first class.
So if we look at the so what, I'm going to give you a couple more strategies. So hopefully some of those strategies from last time, if you didn't try them, you might consider trying them again, because those, you can use them to support project-based learning, but they don't have to support project-based learning. What I wanted to do was to focus on 2 of the elements, and the first element was the in-depth inquiry piece. This is one of the pieces that I think most frequently I see a struggle with, because inquiry is the ability to continually ask questions out of that initial driving question. So if your driving question is written in an open-ended way, I, as a student, really should have a lot of questions to ask about that, right? So, well, what does it mean to be hungry? Well, who is hungry in the world? Are there people that are hungry in the United States, or is it only in, starving kids in Ethiopia? As a kid, I should have all kinds of questions that come to mind, and those are inquiry questions, because I have to find out the answer to those. And as I find out the answer to those, I should have more questions. So as I find out that, yes, there are, in fact, some people that are starving in the United States, well, I want to know, well, why are they starving? What is the government doing about it, right? So now I'm coming up with new questions. And that's really what inquiry is all about. Students are very inclined to want to know the one right answer, right? Because that's the easy way out. It's the path of least resistance. It's that least common denominator. So we have to teach them how to ask questions. And I'm going to give you some different ways in which you can do this. This first way is called brainwriting. And the way that brainwriting works is this. rather than having students brainstorm about a topic, because what happens? You have either they're stuck and you have to give them ideas, or one or two kids do the brainstorming and no one else gets an opportunity to participate. So brainwriting is a little bit different, and this actually was created out of the corporate world. And the way that it works is this, is with Post-it notes. I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. You can certainly do virtual Post-it notes, but I like the physical Post-it notes for this. And you can have kids request a certain number of Post-it notes. You can require that they ask for a minimum of 2 or a minimum of 3, depending on your class. But if they want to have 10 Post-it notes, they can have 10 Post-it notes because they think they have 10 different ideas. But that's why I like to say you need to have a minimum of X number of Post-it notes to start. Whatever your ideas are, you write them down. It's just 1 per Post-it note. And now we're going to stick all the Post-it notes up together. And what we do then, because this is the quantity piece, not the quality at this point, as many as you can get, right? Now we're going to actually put those up and we're going to start to vote on different ideas. Hey, I think that might be feasible. And instead of having kids just raise hands, they can, and you could scatter them throughout the room is probably the easiest way to do it for a flow, or if you just want to put them on tables, and the kids can move from station to station and they can read them. And if I like that idea, I'm going to put a check mark next to it, right? And so the ideas that have the most check marks, now we're kind of paring down, and then we can build on those ideas until we are able to, either as a group or as a class, come up with what ideas we may want to focus on. And it might be that that's how groups get determined, because we really like this idea and this is the idea that we want to work with, and we think this idea has value. It may not have been my idea in the first place. Maybe my idea was a little too wild, but it still had equal worth in the beginning. So this is brainwriting because we all start at that individual piece and we're really thinking deeply about this process. So brainwriting is one of those things to promote inquiry. Everybody's quietly taking notes.
It's a lot easier on this computer without losing.
You need an external hard drive. Back up all your stuff.
I got this. I lost it for 6 months.
And you can even, if you just Google brainwriting, there's a really good, it's a corporate video. The professor that kind of developed this brainwriting thing, just Google brainwriting. And I think it's linked to Fast Company's site, if memory serves me correctly. And there's a quick little 5-minute video, and she talks about how she used it in the corporate world and how these big executives were able to come up with these really great ideas. And so you just use the same thing in your classroom.
You used it on us. We did.
Yeah, I thought we
Yeah, we
did.
Did we do it? We did do it? See, man.
After we read something.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm glad you remembered, right? So the next one is starbursting. I know I didn't use this one on you. So we have our project idea, and that's at the middle of our star. And now to get students thinking about it a little bit more, they have to come up with the where, the who, the what, the how, the why, and the when. But they have to come up with very specific questions about the project idea. So when did this problem start? Might be one of the questions that they ask. What has the government done so far about trying to fix this problem? Who might we ask to help us with finding information? Who might we be helping? Where is this problem occurring throughout the world? I mean, these are just all different things that they could be asking. And again, have them start on an individual basis for this. And if they start on that individual basis, then they can start to share out and they can compare. And hopefully we'll have a whole list of why questions. We'll have a whole list of when questions. So instead of me only creating one question each, now I have my one question and I have all the other questions that everybody else created.
Have you ever seen where they, everybody has a different color pencil or pen,
Mhm.
and like you could have a who sheet, and then you could pass that paper to each person, like you pass, and then you do the what, and then you do the where. I mean, that way everybody has a color, you know who it is.
Mm-hmm. And there's also an online program that you can do with colors.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You can use, my favorite is TitanPad, Titan, pad.com. There are a couple of different versions of it. There's Pirate Pad, there's Primary Pad, but I like TitanPad the best. And what it does is it'll give you a unique generated URL, and whomever has that URL can get into the pad, and then the kids are all assigned colors. And the thing that I like about it better than Google Docs is kind of twofold. One, it's very visual with the colors, so I can immediately see whose colors doing what. And two, there's no lag time. It's all real. The caveat with this is twofold. One, when the kids are in the pad, you can see what color they are because their name's there. Once they leave the pad, their name disappears, so you don't know who has what color. So I always have them put at the top of the pad their name and their color, so that I know once they leave the pad who had what color.
And that's what you have to do with paper too.
And the other, and so it's just the high-tech version of that. The other piece is that I can go back and replay exactly how the conversation unfolds. So if a kid writes something inappropriate and then deletes it, I go back and play it. I see it written in that color. I see, whoop, it's deleted. And now I know exactly who wrote it. So even if we delete things, it's still not really deleted because I can replay that. Mm-hmm. So you can go in and the kids can save different versions. You just have to make sure that a kid doesn't revert to a saved version, because if a kid reverts to a saved version, whatever color that kid is, now the whole pad turns that color. I learned that the hard way in the middle of an activity and somebody screamed, "What happened?" Right? It all turned red. So that's just the online version of doing it. This is the other one. It's called the 5 Whys for Inquiry. So you have kids give statements, whatever it is that they think their answer to the driving question might be, and they partner up with someone, and they have to ask 5 why questions. And it gets really difficult because you can't just ask why, you have to ask a very specific, very tailored why question. Why did you choose to do that over doing this? Right? And then they give you the answer. Now you ask another why question in response to their answer to your initial why. So by the time you get to the 5th why, it's difficult to ask that. But it really makes the person who has to respond think very, very deeply about it. Because oftentimes we want to go with our first gut reaction, and we don't want to change or deviate from that. But if we start asking the whys behind it, now you have to go back to that justification piece. Well, this is exactly why that I am doing this, and I can back up my reasons for deciding why to do that. So I'm a real big fan of the 5 whys.
Can you go back and forth on that? Well, why did you? You know what I mean? The first person asks the question and then they come back and ask them the same question?
I think it's easier if you do it one at a time and focus on one person. And so one person is responding and one person is whying, and then you can flip-flop and go back.
Do you have to interrogate students because I'm just looking at this, and a lot of students, I can hear them saying, I don't know, and I can interrogate. You have to know. There's something in your brain. There's a reason.
Right.
You need to know. Give me something. So do you find that, students are responding or getting that? I don't know.
Sometimes it takes them a while.
Mm-hmm.
Where they are at the beginning of the class versus where they are at the end of the class,
Mm-hmm.
there's a definite growth progress there, a growth pattern there for the kids. it becomes much easier to start to ask why questions the more times we do it. And so I'm gonna, a lot of times, especially with a class that's really resistant, you can, if you need to go ahead. I'm gonna model it for them. And a really good way to model it is if you can get another teacher to come in that might have a prep period that'll give up, 10 minutes of a prep period, and then model it with you, and you can even kind of script it out beforehand, so he or she doesn't have to on the spot come up with why questions. But and that's a really great way for the kids to see, okay, my teacher's showing me how this works, and so that modeling process is really important.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Like, how long does the capstone last?
Well, it's supposed to be all year, which is like overkill.
Oh, all year?
It is. It starts in the fall and it goes all the way until
You do
April
your
and the
presentation?
yeah. So the
Okay.
first year everybody was burnt out on it, and
Right.
so I've learned. We're all getting ready for testing, and you spend the first half of the year rules and whatnot. Long story short, or long story longer. We just started. We just started.
You just, okay.
We just started. And there was one year that we did win the capstone showcase. I let the students roll with it.
That's good.
And so I just let them roll with it. I just give it to them. I do give a lot of guided practice. So right now, they want to work on capstone. They're like, can we work on capstone? Can we work on capstone? So I'm just letting them, but I have to see, are you doing something? So that's why I said, well, I need the rough draft next Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to know who did what.
Mm-hmm.
So then if they have a legitimate argument, because I can't just let them just go and then find out, this is not an argument. We know this. You don't have to do any research to find out that, people die in wars. So we're working on it now, and I think the showcase is the 20th.
Of April?
Yes.
Wow.
The 20th of April.
I didn't know
think
that.
that's enough time. You're starting now.
And I think that
until
also
April.
goes to show that sometimes projects overtake the curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a good thing.
Right.
Because then the kids lose focus on it too, and they're like, well, wait, why are we doing this in the first place? So as you're designing, whether it's a capstone or whether it's any other project-based learning experience within your content area, you can't have it go on ad nauseum,
Right.
because then it just overtakes your curriculum, and then you say, well, wait, I need to do this, and this, and I ran out of time, and or the kids are like, oh, you mean we're still doing this? Really? Are we still doing this?
Talking about Egypt.
So, right. So it's kind of finding that fine balance piece, and some of the examples that are up there, because they're so interdisciplinary and integrated, they were lengthier projects.
Okay.
I mean, the longest one I ever did was 8 weeks, and that was, that in a.
So what's the average length of a good project-based learning?
It depends on the unit. So that 8-week unit, had I done it traditionally, it would have taken me 10 full weeks to do it. So I was able to actually condense the time. I would say on average, I'm looking at about 3 weeks. It is typically the amount of time that I'm going to spend on a project. And that's kind of my comfort level. I was really worried about the 8-week one. I thought that was going to be too much for them. They were really interested in it, and so they were able to come back to it. And we had, had an awful lot of curriculum in it, so they didn't lose focus on it. And we had multiple pieces that had to be completed that were different enough that it wasn't like they were working on one set piece the entire 8-week period. But yeah, I mean, if you started in September, by the time they get to April, are we done yet? Right? Right.
Now, what do you do when you have, I hate to start,
No,
when
that's
you have kids who just start with you but yet they have to do this project and they don't, they come into your school like now in your classroom, and
so if it
would you give them a special?
Depending on how far you are into the project. I mean, it really just depends. So, I've worked with schools that they have a rotating population.
Mhm.
Someone drops out of the group, they bring someone in and here's all the backfill information and let me get you caught up and up to speed. And I'm going to do that because that's the way of life where we are in this alternative school that we have. Everybody's moving in and moving out. If you're on a 3-week project and you're starting the beginning of week 3, I can't expect this child to be able to jump into this project. And so I might spend some individual time with you and you might do some more traditional things.
Okay.
If we're toward the end of the first week and I feel like I can catch you up, I'm going to get you caught up and I'm going to put you into the project. So it just really depends on where you are.
Okay.
Right.
Now, I'm sorry, what course did you teach? What class did you teach?
So I taught pretty much every social studies that there was, 9 through 12, AP and co-taught and everything in between. So the really low ones and the really high ones. Yeah.
Have you ever taught 3 grade levels at the same
time?
Yeah.
In the same class?
No.
Because I've had 3 grade levels in the same class. I've had 10, 11, and 12 in the same class. Yeah, in an elective. It was an elective law class, and so I had all 3 grade levels. My least favorite year was when I had 9th grade in the morning and I had 11th grade in the afternoon. I didn't like my 9th graders so much.
Did you find that you had to did you wear the same hat for the entire class, or did you have
No.
to? Okay.
Oh no, never. No, and that was the hardest part for me with 9th grade was the first time I taught 9th grade, it was my second year of teaching, right? I had student taught with 11th grade, my first year was with 11th grade, and then they put me in with these 9th graders, and I was up here and they were down here, and they're still worried about who's touching whom, right? And tattling, like, give me a break, guys. So it took me a long time to be able to meet them where they were, right? So now I'm fortunate enough that I can go and I can hang out in 2nd grade for a day, and then the next day I might be hanging out with 7th graders, and I get to see kind of everybody in between. But I can take the same principles, but the approach that I have might be very, very different, right?
Yeah, I was asking because I may be doing 3 grade levels next year.
And
fighting it, but we'll see.
And I always, in the last 10 years in the classroom, I always taught 3 different classes a semester.
I'm talking about classes,
So
grade levels.
they weren't necessarily grade levels.
Yeah, I'm talking about 3 grade levels, wearing my 8th grade hat, then
Right.
my 6th grade, and the touching,
Yeah.
and he looked at me. That
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah, so it can be a challenge. But I always say that they give those of us that can handle it the challenges, right? That's the positive spin on it. All right, so the other big piece that I wanted to look at was critique and feedback. Because this is the piece that oftentimes gets left out of the project process because we try to rush through it and say, oh, we really don't have time for that, when we know that reflection is one of the biggest ways to learn. I do not, and I can't stress it enough, I hate the word failure in education. Everybody talks about failing forward. I hate that failing forward. It's not about failing forward. It's about receiving feedback to make whatever it is that you're doing better. Because to me, failure connotates a very negative experience, and if I fail, I shut down. If I receive feedback, and feedback that is given to me in such a way that helps me to grow, then I see it as a positive thing. Students have a hard time giving feedback and receiving feedback, so I did want to share with you a video. I can't draw, and I'm convinced after watching this video multiple times, it's because I never received really good feedback on what it was that I was doing, right? How to change things, how to make it more in line with what I needed to do. And so if we can condition our kids to be able to give appropriate feedback that's helpful. So in the words of Ron Berger, it's be kind, be specific, be helpful. Because how many times do the kids just say, oh, it's great, love it, now I'm done, or that really stinks, or they'll use other words, right? Well, that's not necessarily kind, but it's definitely not helpful. Even if I just say love it, that's not helpful. Well, tell me specifically how. So Ron talks about, you tell the kid to use more expression in their writing, but that's the kid that doesn't know how to do it because they're not doing it in the first place. So it's not specific enough. So even though it might sound specific to us, we're not giving them the concrete ways in which to do it. So it's all about being very, very concrete when you give that feedback. So whether it's feedback from me, the teacher, whether it's feedback from peers, whether it's feedback from experts, each time the kid gets that feedback, they should be able to grow. Reflect and revise, reflect and revise, reflect and revise. Because you have that critique, you have that feedback, and now I can make the necessary changes. So here are just a couple more strategies on how you can do the critique and feedback piece. This message box is actually a political strategy. Politicians started this, and I did used to teach AP government, so it's probably one of the reasons why I like this strategy. So politicians started it. So let's say I'm running for election on a particular stance. What do we say about us on our stance? But what do we say about our opponents on their stance? What do our opponents think about their stance, and what do our opponents think about our stance? So that's the easiest way to explain it. So if you're doing this with a kid and they have an actual idea as to what they want to do in this particular project, well, here's what we say about this idea and why this is a good idea. But if someone else is coming in and looking at our idea, what do we think that they're going to say about our idea? That would be the them on us. What are we going to say about someone else's idea? What do we think that they're saying about their idea? So it forces them to take a different perspective instead of just that my way is the right way. Now we have to think about it from more of a 30,000 foot view and looking at those different perspectives. This came out of the whole, patent process. The NUF test is one of those kind of innovative pieces that they use, where when you come up with ideas and you could start it with a brainwriting process, and you could move directly into this NUF test after you narrow down what it is that you're working with the brainwriting. And so we spend some time on that brainwriting. We have our ideas. Maybe we spend some time with these ideas, playing around with them a little bit more, doing some research on them. But now then we get to the point where we start to rank the ideas, and 1 to 10, whether or not these are good ideas. And we say, are they new, are they useful, and are they feasible? So how do we rank them as being new, useful, and feasible? Because an idea may not be new, it may be out there already, but we may have improved upon it to make it more useful and make it more feasible, so it could still be a really good piece to focus on. It really helps to refocus ideas. So maybe you say, all right, this is a new idea, this is a useful idea, but it's not very feasible. How do we make it more feasible with potentially fewer resources? So that's just an example of how you could refocus that idea. So again, getting the students to think very differently about what their answer is to the driving question and how they might need to revise that. This last one is a critical incidents protocol. And so in using this, you can do it at certain points throughout the project, and you can certainly do it at the end of the project to say, how can we build on what we've learned at the end of the project moving forward into another project? So what specifically happened in this project? Why did it happen? What does it mean? And then what are the implications? But you don't just have to do it at the end. You can certainly do it at various times throughout. But why I like this critical incidents protocol is because it helps us to set goals, both as students and or teachers, because I should be doing this in the project itself too, saying, all right, what happened in this project with my students? Why did this specifically happen? What does it mean? And what are those implications? I'm looking at it from the teaching perspective Did I not meet the needs of certain kids? What should I do differently the next time? How do I set that goal? And then from the student perspective, is they're in the project and completing the project, going through this process and then setting goals so that they can move forward too. And when I have my students set goals, I have them set a goal and say what they intend to do in order to reach that goal, but what can Mrs. Lauer do to help them to reach that goal as well. So that it puts some of the onus on them. Instead of me saying, this is what I think you need, this is them telling me what they need.